Hi there, and welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. This is Stuart Fensterheim, the Couples Expert. Welcome today, again, to this episode of the Couples Expert, where I bring on experts in the field of relationships to help all of you, my community, to really understand how important it is to have a relationship in which we all feel important and special, and that when we don't have that, our world seems upside down and sideways. And what's more important over the last few weeks than not feeling upside down and sideways? Because there's so much going on right now in the news about that, both with some of the killings of the police officers, and I think the best comedy show out there right now is the Republican convention. And I have with me Veronica, Kallos-Lilly, and she and I are going to talk a lot today about vulnerability. And vulnerability is really not something that I'm seeing a lot of over the last few days in this convention. But what I know is that our world is in need for connection, both from our political representatives, but more importantly, from our partners. And Veronica and I are going to talk a lot about that, and we're going to really talk about how to really make a connection with your partner where the two of you really understand that it is not rocket science, that we can have a close relationship if we're willing to take some risks and willing to really open ourselves up to someone who's in our life, and that we want from that partner someone who has our back, who really understands all of us authentically, and that we can be very transparent with. And that's really something that I think is a challenge for a lot of folks because of some of the heartaches that people have had. So Veronica and I are going to talk a lot about this. The reason I have Veronica on is that she is one of the co-authors of an incredibly wonderful book, workbook actually, called EFT Workbook for Couples, The Two of Us. And I love that title. But let me tell you a little bit about Veronica before we bring her on, because I really want to share a bit about my own personal experience with her. Veronica and I met early on in my EFT experience, right after I did a part of the training program called Core Skills. And one of the things that happened in Core Skills is I was able to reconnect with someone in my life that was important to me. So I wanted to share that experience with the EFT community. So what I did is I wrote an article, and Veronica just happened to be the person that received the article and was tremendously helpful to me in editing the article to really send the message home in the way that I wanted it to. You know, as clinicians, we're not really trained to write. And I actually did not like writing at all. And rather soon found a passion in the emotionally focused therapy that wanted me to have to begin to blog and share my experiences. So that's where Veronica and I really met. And Veronica, I wanted to once again thank you for all the efforts that you did in my behalf for that. Veronica and I have kept in touch, and that's really what's so wonderful about connection and the internet, is that we really have that opportunity to stay in touch with people all over the world. And Veronica lives in a city that I just absolutely fell in love with once I went on a cruise to Alaska, which is Vancouver. She lives in Vancouver, so I'm very jealous about that. And she practices at the Vancouver Couples and Family Institute. She is an expert in EFT, and we'll learn all about that today. And also that her passion is really similar to mine in helping couples really understand how necessary it is to have these type of close connected relationship. And she's a clinician, and she also is a trainer. So we're very fortunate that she's graciously given of herself and her time today. So I wanted to welcome you, Veronica, to the Couples Expert podcast, and also tell everyone how excited I am to have you on, for you to really share your insights of how my community can really establish that close relationship that would have the world seem just such a brighter place. So thank you for coming.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
One of the questions I like asking people, because I think my listeners really are very interested in this, is we work in sort of this crazy field of attachment and couples. And I'm always curious why people make the decision to become a counselor, and also why EFT and why couples in particular.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. For me, I almost think that how I was attracted to EFT is a little bit more obvious to me. When I teach, I always share that I was raised by two scientists, a chemist and an engineer. And so you can imagine how much I learned about emotion in my family growing up. And so for me, just to learn emotionally focused therapy as a young graduate student, and to hear that, first of all, like that the full range of emotion and experiencing, anger, hurt, sadness, fear, that's all part of just being human, that was normal. To me, that was very reassuring to hear, because what do we do when we don't know what to do with emotions and we're kind of flooded and overwhelmed by them? The natural thing to do is to close it all down and shut it all down. And I experienced a lot of that growing up in my family. So that's what drew me to EFT. And just that our emotions actually tell us important information about how we're feeling, whether we're feeling safe, whether we're feeling like we're in a healthy relationship or a good job environment. Like if we tune into our emotions, as Sue Johnson says, that's like our internal compass, so that we can listen to our emotions and they help us take care of ourselves and they help us, take care of our relationships. To me, that was all really just powerful, life-altering stuff to learn and experience as well. I think that the couples piece and the family piece I've just always been drawn to relationships, and I've always that's what's touched my heart, relationships and families and couples and their connection. That's always just what has kind of pulled at my heartstrings. So I think I was naturally drawn to working with couples and families for that. I just followed my heart.
And I think for me, it's very similar, but, I began to really think about this, how the couple or the mother and father in this situation, in most situations, really is the foundation of where children learn how to express emotions and how to really deal with conflict and the whole attachment piece. And if we can make a change there, it sort of exponentially then goes. That's right. It's like multi-level marketing almost.
Yes.
The core. It's really the core of the family, and that for me, it sounds very similar for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting to sort of reflect on that question. What drew us here?
And you made an interesting comment a moment ago about the draw to EFT for you was really, in some ways, to not experiencing a lot of emotional talk growing up. And one of the biggest questions that I get from folks really is about, if I didn't have that, can I ever really learn it? And, how do I share that part of myself? And it goes right to the heart of the whole vulnerability question. How do I get vulnerable if I don't know what vulnerability is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have certainly people in my life and in my practice who say those exact words, like, or I don't want to need, even like, I don't want to have needs. I want to be self-sufficient. And I just have huge respect for that, because when I hear that, well, first of all, I kind of relate to it, because I understand, how it's hard to go there when it hasn't been modeled for you and you haven't had kind of a family culture of talking about emotions, expressing your feelings, expressing when you felt hurt by your brother or sister, or when your parent used a sharp tone with you, and how that hurt and how that kind of cut through you. If you haven't had those kinds of conversations, it is foreign territory, right? It's like going through a foreign country. And so we might need a guide, right? When we're going through a foreign country and we don't know the language. And so I just, first of all, have huge respect for that. And I think, when I hear that, I actually think this is a person telling me that they have had life experiences that have not made it conducive, maybe, to getting vulnerable, sharing your hurts and your fears, right? That's how I hear that. And so that's about safety. And I just want to make it really safe in the therapy room and in the relationship, in my own relationships. And so maybe we start like we inch baby steps. And maybe we start by saying, it fills me with dread to even think about feeling my sadness or feeling my deeper emotions. That just fills me with dread, and I don't want to go there. Well, that is a step in vulnerability for someone who, hasn't had those conversations, right? And they almost don't even realize that they are being vulnerable, but they are being vulnerable. So I think it's in us. It's in all of us. It's kind of like your heartbeat. You're not always aware, right, that your heart is beating, but it's in there. It's doing its job. And I kind of think that way about our emotions and our vulnerability. It's in there. And we just make it really safe and tune in and make ourselves aware, we can go there and not realize our worst fears.
Right. And the other piece, which is really interesting, because I had an experience with a couple not too long ago, where I was talking with the gentleman. He called me up. It wasn't in a session. He called me up and he said, I'm not an emotional person. And he had seen countless counselors. They had been through many, many counselors as couples and individually. And basically people were sending him the message that that's not who he is. He's just not one of those people that goes emotional. And we began to talk about it. And as what began to unfold rather quickly wasn't that he wasn't emotional, but he didn't have the emotional words. And that he absolutely had these really intense, deep feelings, but he didn't know what to call it.
Right.
And that opened up an entire world for him. Because he then he was able to hold on to that. Yes, I am emotional. And now it's just about learning how to talk about it, which is so much easier.
Yes. Yeah, you opened his world. You opened a door for him to discover together, right? Not alone, because it's hard to tune into yourself and take out your emotions by yourself.
And I loved your analogy when you were talking about, I think you even said a foreign country or something, and that we need a guide through that. Like if you go on a safari, you're going to have a guide that's going to take you there because you don't want to get lost.
Yes.
And
you don't want to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger.
That's right. That's right. And in EFT especially, and in your book very well, you talk about having a map. And you talk about that what this is about is not the therapist really knowing more, but able to know the path. And so they will guide you to have the right dialogues, and they will guide you in those ways. Can you talk a little bit more about that to help people really understand what that means?
Mm-hmm. I think it means tuning in, being helped to kind of tune into yourself. The first way to do that, I think, is to slow our conversations down, because when we get talking quickly, I think emotions emerge slowly. We have to kind of give them time and space, right? It's not like regular conversation. So the first piece, I think, to that whole puzzle is just really slowing it down.
Paying attention.
And paying attention, tuning in.
Experiencing. And I think the other piece of that, that I guess where I was sort of thinking was more about that it isn't figuring it out just a guessing game. That there really is a method and a plan so that if you want to go from one part of the country to the other part of the country, there's a map that will show you the path.
That's right. Can I give you a little example?
Sure.
And it's just a little example in my personal life, actually, that I talked to my husband. I asked him if I can share it, and he said yes. But it was quite fresh. It happened just when we were going on vacation, and he was taking a 3-week vacation, and I was taking a 2-week vacation because I was coming back to Vancouver to teach for that 3rd week. And so he booked our flights, but mine was a little different than the other 3. And so that all seemed fine. We went to the airport, and I have to preface this by saying we were at the airport at 5 a.m. So this is early. No one was kind of firing on all cylinders. We were all waking up still. And I go to start, the automated check-in. I go and to start to check in, and I could get everyone, checked in except for myself. And I tried like 2 or 3 times, and it kept giving me sort of a reject. We have no, there's no booking under this name. And so I started to kind of tell this to my husband, and I travel a lot, so I use these things all the time. And he kind of said, let me do it. Kind of pulled the piece of paper out of my hand. You
woman, you don't know what you're doing.
So he tries, and it doesn't work.
Us men know technology, not you.
Exactly. And so it does say to go to the counter. So I went to the counter, and indeed there was no record of my booking. So I think what happened was, he got the confirmation on all of them and somehow missed that there wasn't a confirmation for me. And so what do? I say to him, how did this happen? Here we are kind of in a moment. We're supposed to be flying like out of the country. I say, how did this happen? Kind of in that sort of voice that I'm using right now. How would you describe it?
Irritated and frustrated.
Protesting. And he says, I don't know. Like he kind of, shrugs and says, I don't know, but we better check the visa bill to make sure that, we didn't get charged for that last ticket. Not really what I wanted to hear, because I don't know if I'm going on this trip with them. And so I again said, but how did this happen? Now, was that really what my distress was about? No, my distress was, oh my God, they're all about to get on a plane. My husband, my 2 kids are about to get on a plane, and I don't have a ticket to go with them, and I'm going to be left behind. And so we kind of scramble, and I was able to purchase the very last seat on the airplane so I could go with them. And I look at him, and he says, sorry, kind of flat, right? Like, sorry this happened, but just sort of flat. And of course, I don't hear the word sorry. I hear the flatness of it and how it didn't seem like a real sort of committed sorry. And and I had a choice point there. I could have either, like, a part of me wanted to get mad that he didn't sound, really earnestly sorry, but I just kind of slowed it down, and I said, what? I think I did get mad. Actually, in truth, I did get mad. And then he apologized again, and it again was kind of flat. And then I said to myself, what am I really upset about? What's gotten me all jangled? Because I do have a ticket. I'm going on the trip with them. And I kind of had to dig deep to get to the root of that. And this is sort of the answer to your question. It's sort of the difference between staying in the surface conversation and digging down. It's kind of in the book, I talk about it with Jenny, and I talk about it as a difference between snorkeling and deep diving. Snorkeling is staying with the surface conversation, getting frustrated by his lack of response, and kind of going after him, trying to get a bigger, more committed, more empathic response versus deep diving into, and I just realized that what really hurt was that he didn't sound like that upset about the possibility that I wouldn't be going on the trip. It somehow didn't seem to, like, it tore my heart out, and somehow it didn't seem to tear him apart the way I guess I wanted it to. I wanted it to matter that, I wasn't going to go on this trip. And so I said that. I said, it hurts. It seems like it didn't matter to you that much whether or not I was going. And he said, "Oh, hon, I'm so sorry. It's 5:00 and I'm sleepy and I'm not all there. And I'm so sorry. Of course it matters. Of course, we wouldn't be getting on the flight without you." And that was kind of the repair, right? But when I got softer, when I got more vulnerable, when I kind of dug deep and deep dived instead of snorkeled on the surface conversation, I was able to call it up. But you know what? That actually took me some work. Like, even though I'm a psychologist and a couples therapist, you would think I would know this stuff. No, I really still had to ask myself that question. What has really gotten me so jangled here? What's gotten me so distressed? It wasn't the surface conversation.
And I think even as you're telling this story, I'm sitting here with chills because I think all of us can relate to that experience. And I think for a lot of people, and I think the advantage that you had was that you do this all the time. But if we put it into a perspective of someone that doesn't understand the difference between snorkeling and deep diving, for example, I could absolutely see myself turning to my partner and says, "You jerk, how dare you do this to me?" And never really allow yourself to get to what the real issue there, I think, was. And I think partly what you were talking about, at least for me, the experience I was relating to was my partner didn't take care of me. They didn't make sure that, and I could see myself going, if I was important to him, if I was important to her, she would have made sure, she would have checked and double-checked and triple-checked 4 or 5 times, would have gone through the seats and the confirmations and seen this. They didn't even take the time to do that. How dare they? Instead of recognizing it's really about your experience of saying, okay, I feel like my partner didn't take care of me. That doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
And how do you access that deep dive and figure out where that comes from?
And you know what? I'm just sitting here thinking how humbling it is as a therapist that we don't actually know ourselves. We have to discover it along with our clients. What is the sore place? What is the raw place that just got brushed on there? Because it sounds like between you and I, it's a little bit different. Like, if it was you, it would be like, I'm not being taken care of here. I'm somehow not being tended to. For me, I'm not special enough. For me, it was, I think it was connected to all the travel that I do to teach and train, and how they seem to get along just really well without me. And on one hand, that's good because they're not suffering. On the other hand, maybe it means that I'm not really needed by them, and that they're just fine without me, and that somehow I'm not, maybe similar. I'm not special, but it's that I'm not special, but it has a different sort of context, right? And to me, it's like, it's so interesting how we all have our little version or our own little twist on it, and how we only know by letting ourselves go there. And even as therapists, we don't know what it is for another person. We have to discover it with them. And
yeah, I mean, what's so cool about it, and this is really, for me as a counselor, one of the saddest pieces also, is when people sitting in your office or two people in a relationship see themselves as so different, when human nature is human nature. And what you and I just went through here was I had a different experience than you had. But as you pointed out very eloquently, but there was a similar feel to both of us. It's just a different place that we went.
Yeah.
And if we can sit with a partner and really believe and trust that they can understand, because they do have that, they go to the same place but differently. Yeah. I don't have to see my partner as never understanding.
Right. Because at the core, we do have sort of basic needs, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And we all have those raw spots, as you're talking about.
Yeah.
Could you identify a bit on those raw spots? Because we talk a lot about raw spots in EFT and in your book. How people, when you identify that raw spot, how do you share that in a way that your partner truly, and you can experience them as really caring?
Mm-hmm. Well, we talk about what we call love conversations in the book. I don't know if that's what you're thinking about, but we have a little acronym, LOVE. So there is a poster and also a little write-up on the love conversations that I think you're going to share with the listeners. But it really starts with it's sort of a framework for how to have a vulnerable conversation with your partner, where you kind of risk being transparent and saying what you're feeling. And it might be what you're feeling in the relationship. It may be, it hurts me when, you don't call me when you're coming home late from work. And, I end up feeling like, I don't know, you don't really want to come home. And I end up feeling like not very important, or that the family's not very important to you. Or, so it could be like being transparent and vulnerable about something that happens between us. Or it could be about how I'm feeling in the world. Like, I remember when my husband was ill and he needed a colonoscopy, and he turned to me and said, "Will you come with me? I'm nervous about this procedure. Will you come with me?" And it's about, something, wasn't something to do with our relationship, but he was needing me and leaning me. And that's when I think about vulnerability, I think of those two aspects. It's about really letting you see me, letting you into my inner world as it is, without kind of sanitizing it or watering it down, but kind of letting you see my raw spots, my insecurities, my fears. And it's about letting you see my need too, my need when I feel unsafe or distressed.
And willing to ask for something that you might need, even though if it feels like it might be weakness a bit.
Right. It is a risk, right? So that's why we kind of came up with the love conversations. The L stands for listening. And it's kind of like at the heart, it starts with a willingness to listen to your partner and know that, and having that faith that you are going to be listened to. It's really hard to open up and share something vulnerable or tender, or like a weakness that you see in yourself. If you think you're going to get sort of cut off at the the first pass before you really get it out. And so it starts with listening, and we say tune into the words, but even more tune into the feelings behind the words. And actually our brain does this naturally, right? Our brain is wired to tune into people's emotions. So even that person that isn't aware of their emotions, actually they're aware of their partner's emotions, because they get scared when their partner is angry or disapproving, and they just haven't necessarily labeled it, but they get that clenched feeling in their stomach, or their heart starts pounding, and that's emotion, right? So it's about kind of tuning into the emotion and tuning into how maybe your partner looks defeated, as they're saying, "I just got a terrible job review," tuning into the tears as your partner chokes up and says, when I didn't hear from you for hours after work, I just felt hurt and like scared. Yeah, scared.
What's the O? You said that's the L, listening.
That's the L, listening.
What's O?
O is openness, listening with an open mind and an open heart. An open mind means actually setting aside your presumptions and your preconceived assumptions. Our assumptions can kind of get in the way and steer our our emotions and bring up emotions. And the negative is more salient, right? We know that because that's helped us protect ourselves in the past. Right. So it's open mind and open heart. An open heart means actually letting your words and your experience touch me. And when you do that, it's just really natural. We don't need to teach people what to do. It's really natural. They say things like, I want to hold your hand. One of my couples said that just this morning. I want to hold your hand when I see this. Or I want to reassure you. Or even sometimes I want to fix it. I want to fix it for you. And even if the partner doesn't really like the fixing, to know that it comes from a place of, wanting to help and soothe and kind of just, soothe the distress is already helpful, right?
Just the fact that someone cares enough to want to do
fix
that.
It.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so now we're at V.
So
now we're at V.
V's validate.
Oh, I thought it was going to be vulnerability.
Vulnerability. It should be. So we have to put that in the next edition.
Validate vulnerably. There you go.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Validate. So validate being just to reinforce.
Sort of the quick solution or the defense, just to kind of sit with it long enough to say, I see you're hurt. You don't have to agree. All you have to care is that's what happened to your partner.
The thing that I hear a lot with couples is someone goes, I was really scared. And then the other person said, no, you weren't.
Yeah.
That seems like a small thing, but it's so big.
It
can really pull people so far apart. And that's really the message you're saying. All you have to do is turn to your partner and go, I'm sorry you felt that way. That doesn't mean I agree you felt that way, as you're saying. But at least I'm acknowledging your experience with it.
Right.
And that can change, that in itself can make it better.
Right.
So now we're at E.
So E is for how you express. And it is actually about, expressing your feelings, hopes, dreams, and disappointments, like kind of in their authentic form and not kind of watering them down. It's about confiding, really. Expressing is about confiding. And this is, I think, where the vulnerability comes in. When your partner can express something slowly, softly, and simply, that's true, real for them in their experience. That's a big message. It's saying, I trust you. I'm taking a risk to share something about myself, maybe that I don't like, and I'm afraid you might see as weak. It is a risk.
No, it's really cool about what you just did. I just realized something. Because how many people come to counselors or friends and say, I don't know what the hell love is. You've just defined it so well. If we really think about it, what is true love? True love is having a relationship with someone who listens to you, is open to your feedback and open to your heart. Someone who you feel so validated by and you validate, and someone who you can really express your true self with. That if you have those criteria, you're in love. And
I have to give a lot of credit to Jenny Fitzgerald, my co-author.
That's fine, but I'm just saying it's an interesting, it's so clear that it's a criteria that anyone can do, including people who aren't married, who are in a dating relationship, who says, is this really a good relationship for me? Am I really in love? Well, do you experience this? It's just interesting.
And even a parent-child relationship,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of cuts across relationships.
Thank you for sharing all of that, because I think it's such a powerful message. I think one of the last questions, although it can even be a whole podcast if we want it to be, so I hesitate asking it a bit, but with all the things you were talking about, defining the love and all of that, when you have a really serious relationship injury, how to stay present with that is such a big challenge. And I don't want you to address the whole topic, obviously, because that's a whole other thing. But how do you really, what would be your advice to someone who says, I can't even let my partner in at all because I've been hurt so deeply by them? How do we get hold of that, applying these principles, and making it something where we can see that there's an end to the pain?
I think the simple answer to your question is we risk it in baby steps. And I think both partners have to kind of be on board with going that direction, right? To into that more intimate, tender conversation. Like if I'm, my husband comes home and I'm cooking and answering the phone and signing consent forms for my kids at school for their school trip, I'm not in a headspace where I can really be responsive and present to him. So part of it is you kind of got to set this up as something that you really want and kind of get on board. And it's almost like, the high diving board and the low diving board at the pool. Like you guys have to decide together, you're going to climb up that high diving board and you're going to jump off holding hands together. Because I don't want to set anyone up for, if I just need to be vulnerable and then my partner will be responsive. That doesn't always go that way. I mean, we have that instinct, but if there's been a lot of hurt in the past and a lot of kind of missing each other when someone has tried to be more vulnerable, then I appreciate and honor how scary and risky it can feel. So kind of getting on board with one another, that this is kind of where you want to take your relationship, to this more intimate place and to strengthen your bond, but then taking it in really small steps. And the first step might be, it fills me with dread to actually open up. I just need to start there. Like that's already a little bit of vulnerability. And
exploring, if you're not quite there, exploring why you're not there. Is it that you don't believe, or is it that you're afraid to believe?
That you've had experiences maybe with your partner, but maybe even before. Maybe in your family where it wasn't safe to open up, or it was seen as, you would have been rejected, or you would have been ridiculed or ignored, right? Those are formative experiences. And so people have very good reasons for sometimes being afraid of opening up. And it's okay. It's just starting with those baby steps and knowing that it's a journey and it's a process, and it's not something that kind of happens all in one big conversation, right? It's many little conversations that build the safety. Oh, well, I shared my dread, and my partner didn't turn away in disgust and didn't actually abandon me at all, but reached out and stroked my hand. Well, that wasn't so bad. So maybe I can risk sharing a little more.
With that in mind, I guess the last question I wanted to ask you, and again, I want to just thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing. I think there's such a lot of learning that people are going to take from this episode. And one of it that you and I once talked about, which is, different parts of the world and different parts of the country even practice emotionally focused therapy a little different.
Right.
And I think back in the Arizona area, at least, and I think on the West Coast, we talk about taking an elevator down to getting to that. The analogy of snorkeling, deep diving, for me, is such a wonderful one. And I think it's almost clearer what we're talking about. Because snorkeling, you stay on top of the water, and deep diving, you go down. So I love that as one thing that I think people are going to take away from this. The other is with your workbook. And when I look at the workbook, it's so wonderful. And it's broken down very similar to the Hold Me Tight book. and the chapters. So my question to those folks that want to go out and purchase it, and they can get that on Amazon, I'm aware. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of different places that have it, but Amazon's probably the easiest. How should people use the workbook in conjunction with reading, whether it's Love Sense or Hold Me Tight? What would be the recommendation of how it should be used?
Well, the way we thought about the workbook is that it would actually be used in conjunction with therapy, emotionally focused therapy. And I always imagined that the therapy would be ahead of the workbook in terms of people's, these two tracks, and that you would be learning, first of all, what's your dance, what's your negative dance, and then you'd read a chapter on that and you'd identify your negative dance. And so you'd be doing it in therapy, and it would kind of prime you to be able to do the chapter in the book, and then you could come back and talk about it, and so that the therapy and the book would dovetail really nicely. What I wouldn't want is for the workbook to become just an intellectual exercise and
the primary focus.
Like I have, I wouldn't want people to come in with the workbook and say, okay, well, I'd like to go over all the exercises in chapter 3 or whatever, because then it's all becomes an intellectual exercise. The workbook is to provide the scaffolding between sessions when your therapist isn't there, but it's a workbook that is totally lockstep the process and the map of EFT. So you're not kind of doing some other theory outside of the session and kind of getting something else inside the session. So it's meant to be seamless that way.
Right. And the other piece, and I want to just make sure before people go about their day that this is okay, is if you're not in counseling currently, but let's say you've gone through a Hold Me Tight weekend, I think it's an absolute okay supplement to that, even if you're not with a therapist. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so, especially for couples that want to enhance their relationship. And yes, they get caught in some cycles, but it's not sort of like doesn't pervade their relationship, and they're not super distressed. Right. The other I'll share a little fantasy I have. Is that is that couples would do it in bed.
Oh, I like that.
They would read. One partner would read a section, and then they'd kind of do an exercise together in bed, and then they'd put it away. And I'll leave it up to their imagination
what happens in the bed. But I don't know if I like the concept of foreplay doing a workbook.
Okay, I got you there.
But I do like it. We could do it in the nude. How's that?
That would really spice it up.
Thank you very much. I love the way we ended this. Thank you very much for coming on. And I think the whole concept of playfulness, this is really how we're ending it. Yeah. Playfulness, intimacy is about both an intellectual and physical experience. And if we can really have true love, LOVE, and on top of that, an emotional closeness and a sensuality, what else would we want?
Playfulness, yeah.
Yes.
I'm right there with you. Thank you so much, and I wish you many love conversations, and
Thank you.
I wish your listeners many love conversations.
Thank you, and take care, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.